Tell us briefly about your arrest in 1992.
My arrest in 1992 was just as much of a haze then as it is now. Uh, I found myself in a situation where I was on a run for first degree murder. And my situation was predicated on association with some of my friends who were into a lot of drug activity. And somehow, some way, according to the courts, I was implicated as the trigger man in a drug robbery, so to speak. And because I didn't want to stand up to that or talk about that or go downtown and be arraigned or arrested and questioned about that, my decision was to go on a run and try to sort it out. Had no idea how that was going to affect when I did get arrested and go through trial because I had never been in this kind of situation before. And I did get arrested, extradited from Georgia back to North Carolina. And when I went to trial, I got found guilty of first degree murder and got sentenced to natural life in prison.
So, can you describe what happened after you were arrested in jail?
Well, after I was arrested and in jailed, again, I was arrested in Georgia by the FBI. I was considered a flight risk. SOS means shoot on sight. I was considered armed and dangerous, which intensified my confusion about the whole thing. It was as if I was hearing a story about somebody else totally, and that somebody else happened to be me. So when the FBI arrested me and extradited me back to North Carolina, I stayed in jail awaiting, I guess, the court process for almost 2 years.
It's my understanding you told me that you were held in solitary confinement in jail. Can you describe that and what happened?
When I was in jail, I was held in solitary confinement for 88, 88 days. My initial inception into jail, I went straight into solitary confinement. And I was told that I was put in there because of the nature of my crime and because of how I was described as this man on the run for first degree murder that was armed and dangerous. And because my crime happened in North Carolina and I got arrested in Georgia, when I awaited the extradition process, I was in solitary confinement for the whole tenure until North Carolina officials came to Georgia to pick me up, to transfer me from Georgia to North Carolina. And while I was in solitary confinement, because I had never been to jail before, my assumption was that's what the whole process was like. Although I saw on TV that there were these big yards where everybody kind of congregated, I always wondered when would that be my experience. But having started off in solitary confinement, which is total isolation from anybody else, never interacting with anybody else, the shock of that kind of shaped my mind to adjust to that, no matter how long I would be in jail, not thinking I would go to trial and lose trial and go to prison. I thought however long the process of being in jail until I went to court was, I was prepared mentally to deal with that.
So, describe what it was like, and
Oh wow,
you.
it numbs you. It the disconnect. Having never experienced that before, knowing you're in a room in a cell, and there are other people in other cells right on your left and on your right, banging on the walls, singing songs, yelling to each other. Then you get this kind of silence because it seems like everybody fell asleep at a certain time. For me, being the newest guy there, I'm not in this jail rhythm yet. There's a rhythm to when you're going to feed you, when you're going to lay down, when you're going to be able to get a shower, when you might be able to use the phone. All that's brought to you, by the way. You don't come out to stretch your legs and go from point A to point B to do all of that. It's kind of brought to you. So mentally, you find yourself going through all kind of cycles in your head, and you really don't know how to adjust, and you mentally and physically go through a transformation because you're truly isolated from anybody and everybody else. And for me, I started to identify some of the circumstances that people who had been there for years and months in that isolation state or phase. And I started to hear they're crazy. And I really mean hear they're crazy. They start talking to themselves. They start having arguments with people that weren't even in the cell with them. And then they start reaching out. Hey, what you doing over there? You sleep? What's your name? Where you from? What you look like? So they would go back and forth from reaching out to civilization, right, for interaction, and then they would go back within themselves and go into another place that was just them and some imaginary person. So that's what I mean when I say I started to identify they're crazy. And I would lay down and say, I wonder what's that like? Were they already kind of crazy before they came here? Did this place being here for months make them crazy? I don't know. And I started telling myself, excuse me, that I had to stay strong. I didn't want to let this place win that way or shape me in that way. And I didn't talk to anybody because I didn't know anybody. I was still, like I said, dazed and confused about what was going on with me. And being in isolation gave me enough private or downtime to try to make sense of it. But I think for me, the strangest thing is that you're in a space by yourself and you have no idea. You're blindsided all the time by everything. Imagine being in a room that's dense, dark, and you have an opponent in that room, and every few minutes you get struck in the face, and you don't know where it's coming from. You can't see the blows, you can't duck them, and you can't even throw one back because it's as if your opponent can see and you can't. That's what Chow Call was like, not knowing the rhythm or cycle of jail. You don't know when they're going to feed. You don't even know what time it is of day. And you had to really kind of give yourself up to any kind of control or ownership about day and night, about AM, PM, about Monday through Friday. You just kind of in the blind. And it's the more I talk about it, it's kind of torturous because you totally isolated. And you get, it feels like it's a violent reminder of things like shower call. It's not told to you gently. It's like it's a taunting of it. You know, you might fall into a deep sleep and next you know somebody's banging on your cell door saying, hey, you gonna take a shower or what? And you know if you miss it, you might not get it for another 2 or 3 days. So you kind of, it's all by time. So it's cruel in the sense that you're totally cut off from any sense of awareness about what's coming. And those who do it the longest, they know when to anticipate. They develop like this keen sense of timing that's not based on what your wristwatch says or the wall on the clock says. They could sense it. It should be about time for them to change shifts. And then it's almost going to be time for them to do a count. And then it's going to be a time. And then you entertain yourself by trying to guess it and anticipate it. And then arguments would start. And they would say, how much you want to bet that when I get finished doing these 25 push-ups, it'll be telling us it's chow call. Chow will be coming. No, it's going to take you because you don't have the ticking of a clock. The other guy might say, no, it's going to take you about 50 push-ups because it usually takes you about 7 minutes to do 50 push-ups straight. If you can do them straight, and by the time you finish your 50, they should be feeding us. And when you're the new jack and you hear how human beings are trying to negotiate a sense of timing about when things are going to happen, it becomes interesting. And that's what I mean when I say you start to get a sense or hear people's crazy, how the brain can try its best to make sense of anything and entertain itself. And then when some of the staff or officers get a sense that you guys are adjusting to how we're doing things, they'll totally offset it again. They want to feel like you're begging for air. But if you learn how to hold your breath real well, they'll say having them beg for air is not enough because they figured out how to hold their breath. So let's make them beg for water. And if you learn how to adapt to no water, they'll figure out something else. Let's hold their mail. Because timing is important. You know, like, okay, it's 3 o'clock. They normally pass out mail about 3:30. And when you figure that out and you get good with figuring that out, they'll wait and they won't pass the mail off until the next shift comes on. That might be 7 p.m. Now you're thinking, wait a minute, my anticipation is off. My judgment was off today. How did that happen? When you finally found out that it wasn't off, that for whatever the reason, they decided to delay what you know usually happens at this time, then you try to reset around that. So it then becomes like a cat and mouse game. And that's what I mean when I say you listen to people's crazy, how they rationalize what time of day it is based on a lot of different things.
So you've actually described how you coped with being isolated like that. Did you spend time in solitary in prison?
Yeah, I did.
Can you describe the difference between being isolated in jail and isolated in prison?
Well, of course, on the onset, after maybe, I don't know, 15 years, started off, I did almost 90 days in solitary from the onset of my arrest. And then went through the court process, got found guilty, went to prison, which is structured different than jail. And prison was my experience of being in fellowship and congregating with the masses of people. And then after, I don't know, 6 or 7 years of prison, I found myself in isolation again for undue familiarity. And that was an investigation process as well, meaning you could be there indefinitely until they sort everything out. And when I was told that I was going to, at that time it was called segregation. And the name has changed over time, restrictive housing, isolation, et cetera, et cetera. When I was told I was going to segregation, I had a frame of reference from the time I spent in isolation in the onset. And it wasn't strange to me. I had total recall of how to manage and negotiate and adjust to that. And I did that. But at the same time, my way of entertaining myself was, I guess, being two people at the same time. And on the one hand, I was this experienced guy who did this before, right? Who took that punch early on when I first got in the ring. So I knew I could handle it. And then I entertained myself about mentally becoming a guy who never did it before and trying to figure it out. And that was my entertainment. And when you it's like being blindfolded and you hear doors open and close. You feel the breeze of the door open and close. You hear the clanging of the shift changing. You hear the keys. The officers, they do counts. They make sure nobody's harmed themselves or nobody died in their sleep or nobody escaped. So the officer comes on. You can close. I could close my eyes right now and I can hear the officers, these big giant skeleton keys dangling on his keychain, and he's walking by. And he's looking in every cell. If you're awake, if he's a nice guy, he might speak to you. If not, he won't. If you're awake and he makes eye contact with you, he just wants to make sure. If you're asleep, he may bang on the door so you can get up and show some kind of gesture that you haven't passed away in your sleep. And you hear that again. And if they have a newspaper that they decided to share with that wing of isolation. Wing meaning if there's 50 people or 20 people or 10 people, that's considered a wing. And they'll pass the newspaper from one cell and you got 15 minutes to read it. And then when he gets it back from this guy in cell 1, in 15 minutes, the guy in cell 2 gets it, cell 3 gets it. Everybody gets to see the paper. And if you get used to that, that's something to do throughout the day. And if you get too used to that and you don't get the paper, then all hell breaks loose because a person is used to some smither or margin of control. And that's their only way to the outside world is to read the newspaper. And there's this great anticipation that, at least I get to read the newspaper for 15 minutes today. But if the officers don't bring it with them when they're coming into that wing, then you won't get the newspaper today. And you wait on your personal mail if you get any. And if you don't get any mail and you don't get the newspaper or you can't read and you don't have anybody to bang on the cell next door and say, hey, man, what you in SAG for, man? What part of prison did you come from? What was your write-up? Who are you? What's your name? You hear people kind of vying and pining for connection. And you also can sense and see the deterioration of people who've been in SAG or isolation for years and years, and they finally get brought back to population, is what we call it. Meaning you're out of segregation and you're back in that big open space where a whole bunch of people are. And you can see the deterioration. I could see it, of how being there for so long has disconnected them so much that they can't give back. And they're in SAG in their mind, even though they're amongst the population.
When you say they can't give back, what do you see among people who have been in SAG for a long time?
What I saw is what I saw in the onset of my 90 days, and what I heard is what I became mindful of that I didn't want to happen to me. And when I say they can't get back, I'm describing the disconnect is it's such a clean break that they don't know how to socialize well. They don't care to. Not being in SAG is more than just being back around people. You have access to the shower. You can shower more often. You have more space and proximity to move around. You get to walk a big yard where 4 laps around a yard equals a mile. When you're in SAG, you walk in your cell if you decide to walk. You run in place in your cell. Being out of segregation, you have this big old vast area to maneuver about. But what I'm describing is that person who's not in segregation or isolation or whatever you want to call it, restricted housing anymore, and they're physically amongst other people, but within themselves, their social skills have kind of diminished. Atrophy. They're in their own space in their head. They're still in segregation.
What for you, William Elmore, was the biggest challenge of being in SAG?
For me, the biggest challenge of being in SAG was understanding how damaging that really could be to the psyche. And by nature, I'm an ambivert, meaning I'm introverted sometimes and I'm extroverted sometimes. And I enjoy that. I understand that about myself. However, I'm also an empath. Meaning I connect with people. I feel with and through people. And being in SAG around so much pain and trauma that's pressed down and isolated, I felt that. So the challenge was to consider and stay mindful of the people that were still in SAG when I got out of SAG. Yeah, wondering how they were doing, wondering what they were doing, and wondering, was anybody aware or even cared to know how this is affecting them? And I say that because most people, whether they're in SAG or on the big yard that I described, get released from prison. And they're expected that when you get out, to perform normally and function like everybody else. And if you've been in seg, that's such a layer, that's such a level of layers that impedes you getting out and socializing. I won't say normally, but I would say in a healthy way. And I see that all the time working in transitional houses. I could tell guys that have been on lockup by how they interact, how they move around, how they create space, how they reach around each other. It's such a language that I can understand loud and clear. I could say to myself, that guy did a lot of lockup time. And someone else might say, how do you know? And I could say I could tell how he sits in the living room with all the other guys when it's movie time. Or I could tell how he decides not to sit in the living room with the other guys at transitional housing when it's movie time. I could tell by how he says or doesn't say excuse me when he needs to reach over somebody at the kitchen table to get the salt or the pepper. It's a language, it's an understanding that I have, having been around that so much and haven't been there myself. So my awareness and my sense of self gives me something to fight back with, because I don't think I was there long enough to take on those behaviors, but I was there long enough to identify them.
Do you ever have nightmares? You ever think, I mean, has it had a lasting effect at all?
Yeah, I nightmares, daymares, whatever you want to call it. It's always with me. I kind of describe myself as being two people when I was in seg, a person that's present with where I am, and then a person that's aware of himself having done this before. I'm still that way now today. The person that's aware and being present is the extrovert. The person that goes inside within himself, he's the introvert. And I'm always watching myself while I'm with myself. I'm always projecting myself to see how that place has affected me. So I get to watch my own movie and say, cut, don't do that like that. Or I get to stop and ask myself, explain to the audience why you did that like that. What were you communicating? And being in isolation gave me the opportunity to do that in my head, because it's all in your head. And there's a healthy way to be in your head, and then there's an unhealthy way to create a whole world in your head and get stuck in there and not know which door to come out of. And that's what I mean about unhealthy isolation time. And then when you get out into the world and you're in that world in your head, you can't reconcile the two. And it becomes two worlds colliding. And that could be very dangerous. And I'm around that all the time. And it's sad. It's so sad. It's so sad to watch a guy that doesn't know how to get out his head. And I think isolation, lockup, segregation, restricted housing, whatever you want to call it, it nurtures that. It nurtures that. Because when you're in there, you find that the safest place in the world is in your own head. But when you get released from that, you don't know that the most dangerous place in the world, now that you're integrated back into the world, is in your head.
That's well said. That's good. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
I'm in real time. I'm in two places. Like, I'm back in SEG and I'm hearing some of the guys, their voices. And when I say the voices, I literally mean their voices that come out of their mouths and the voices from how they beat on the walls, how they communicated. Yeah, how they may have hummed a song, or how they may have shed some tears, and how they may have just yelled out, man, I'm tired of being on lockup, man. When they gonna let me out of here? That's so sad when somebody's right next to you, reaching out for something, and you have no idea why he's in SEG or what he did to go to SEG. But what you do know is you feel his pain, his trauma, and you feel his effort to get out of there. And it's so unfair that he's anticipated or expected to perform well after that. Same way with getting released from prison. It's like you're out now, you should go perform well. With no tutelage, no therapy, no help, just perform well. And now you want, if you want to make that tighter and harder, put that same person in segregation, which is like a prison inside a prison, and release him from there back into population or back into society straight from SEG. I think of a story where I had an opportunity to go to Oakland. I was out of prison maybe a year, to a reentry summit. So 26 years, right? Disconnected, and I'm in RDU airport. And I was so overwhelmed, I almost missed my flight. I was dropped off at RDU airport, and I had my ticket on my phone, and I had a dress rehearsal. Like when you get to the boarding area, you just show your phone, and they're gonna look at it, and you're gonna be good. And the ticket was put on my phone so I didn't lose the physical ticket. Mm-hmm. And I was so overwhelmed in an airport, and I felt like I was in another country. And I see all these gates and all these long, I don't know, corridors, go this way, go that way. And I'm doing this all by myself, and I'm sweating bullets. I'm nauseous, and I don't want to miss this flight because I feel like there's no turning back. Like you got to go through with this. You can't just say, nah, I don't want to go. I could have, but I didn't think I had the power or the voice to say, I don't feel like doing this. So I mustered up the courage to follow through, and I didn't know what I was doing, and nobody seemed to care that I didn't know what I was doing. Nobody said, sir, you need any help? You look lost. How could I help you? I didn't have that service at the airport because I'm looking at everybody else's maneuvering like we do this every weekend. We know where we're going. So no matter how much I stood still and opened my eyes real wide and looked like I didn't know what I was doing, nobody came to see whether I knew what I was doing or not. I felt so alone amongst all these people at RDU airport. And I hated that feeling. I felt weak. I felt vulnerable. I felt insecure and insignificant and invisible. And that was something I carried with me when I made it all the way to Oakland. Because I kept saying, you got to do this all over again to get back. Everybody's like, how was it? How was it? And I said, I don't want to talk about it. I don't have the language yet to talk about it. It was too much to be thrown in the dense darkness in this house, in this room, all by myself for 25 years. And then you put a blindfold on me and you whisk me away. And when you take the blindfold off, I'm in RDU airport and they're saying, you got 10 minutes to board your plane. That's too much. That's just too much. Somehow, by the grace of God, I did it. It's too much. And that's what I think about with all of the people, not just getting out of SEG, but getting out of prison, period. It's too much. And as a peer support specialist and as a SWIFT facilitator, I'm face to face with that too much all the time. And when you add the male ego to that says, hey, I know what I'm doing. And I'm the guy who wants to walk up to people at the airport that look like they don't know what they're doing and say, hey, can I help you? I know the feeling. I've been there before. Oftentimes, some of us don't even know how to receive that assistance. No, I'm good. I'm fine. I know which way I'm going. You watching them go to the wrong terminal. You know they're going to get on the wrong plane. And it's too much. Again, it's too much to watch. But when you care, you run up to them and say, look, I know you don't know me. I'm telling you, you're going the wrong way. Not going to make it that way. I know what I'm doing. I know what I'm doing. I'm good. I know what I'm doing. So it's too much. It's very complex.
Yep. And I think that's a great metaphor, just that overwhelm.
Yeah, hyper overwhelmed.
Yeah. And everything has moved on so fast without you.
And it's still moving. It's not slowing down for you.
I know.
It's not slowing down for you. Yeah, it's tough.
Thanks.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks for doing this.